All right, today we're going to dive into something pretty amazing. We're looking at one of nature's most incredible systems, the honeybee colony, to ask a really big question. What can a bunch of bees teach us about ourselves and maybe even our future? Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Bees and humanity's future? That sounds like a bit of a leap, right? But just stick with me here, because the connections between how a beehive works and how our own world is structured are way deeper and more surprising than you might think. So to get started, we've got to look inside the hive. First things first, we have to completely change how we think about a hive. It's not just a collection of thousands of individual insects buzzing around. You have to start seeing it as something else entirely, something bigger, something like a single intelligent being. And there's a word for this: superorganism. Just picture it. The whole colony, tens of thousands of bees, all acting as one. The collective intelligence of that hive, its ability to solve problems, is so much greater than the intelligence of any single bee inside of it. It's a classic case of the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. But here's the really wild part. This incredible organization, this beautiful order, it doesn't come from a queen sitting on a throne giving out commands. There is no central boss, no top-down control at all. Instead, all of this complex behavior just emerges. It happens because thousands of individual bees are each following a few very simple rules. It's all built from the bottom up. So with that idea in mind, let's make our first big jump. What if our own human society works in a similar way? What if it's kind of like a huge living computer? This brings us to a concept with a really big name: Neuromorphic Sociology-nomics. I know, it's a mouthful, but don't get hung up on the word. The idea itself is actually pretty straightforward. It's just a way of seeing all of society as one giant living network that's wired a lot like your own brain. Every conversation you have, every purchase you make, it's like a single neuron firing, creating these massive collective patterns of thought and action. And this is where you can really see the parallels. A bee's pheromone signal, that's kind of like how our brains strengthen or weaken the connections between neurons. Or what about the famous waggle dance that bees do to share the location of flowers? That's a perfect example of creating a shared map of the world from lots of individual reports. It's like nature literally gave us the blueprint for a decentralized network. So, if there's no central command, no king or queen giving orders, then who or maybe what is actually in charge? This is where the beehive model gets really interesting for understanding a super complex topic: power. And to wrap our heads around this, we're going to turn to the philosopher Michel Foucault. He had this revolutionary idea that power isn't just a force from on high that tells you no. He said power is actually a productive network that flows through all of society, creating knowledge, creating norms, and shaping our behavior. Foucault even had a special name for this: biopower. And it's not about police or armies. It's way more subtle. It's about how a whole system manages the life of its population to keep things healthy and productive. And that is a perfect description of the hive. It's not run by force. It's run by this incredible web of chemical signals and behaviors that ensures the whole colony thrives. This comparison really nails the difference. Think about a king's decree. That's a direct command you have to obey. Now compare that to the queen bee's pheromones. It's not an order. It's an invisible field, an atmosphere that surrounds the whole hive, signaling that everything is okay. It shapes whatever bee does without ever forcing them. That is distributed power. So, you see how it all connects? That little waggle dance isn't just information, it's power. It turns knowledge about where food is into the power to direct the work of the entire hive. And all those chemical signals flying around, it's a kind of constant surveillance, making sure every single bee is aligned with the hive's goals. It's a system of discipline that works perfectly without any disciplinarian. Okay, now we're going to get really futuristic. If we can truly understand these incredible principles of self-organization and distributed power, could we actually use them to consciously build better societies for ourselves? And this brings us to a mind-bending concept called a holofield. Think of it as a technologically supercharged version of the hive's network. It's almost like a digital pheromone field where humans, powerful AIs, and endless streams of data are all interacting, all co-creating a shared reality and a collective intelligence. The roadmap to get there is actually pretty logical. First, you have to deeply understand the biological blueprint that things like beehives give us. Then you translate those principles into code, into algorithms. And finally, you use that code to engineer totally new social systems that are more adaptive, more resilient, and frankly, just plain smarter. And the potential applications here are just staggering. I mean, imagine living cities where the infrastructure literally reconfigures itself in real time based on traffic flow and public need. Or think about making big decisions. Instead of just voting, a consensus could naturally emerge from the network. This could even give us AIs that are constantly aligning themselves with our shared human values in real time. So, what would the worker bees of this future look like? Maybe nanoswarms. Yeah, tiny autonomous bots. They could be repairing our cities at a microscopic level, monitoring our health from inside our own bodies, or maybe even creating subtle energy fields in public spaces that encourage cooperation and empathy. It's wild stuff. So, let's bring this all back down to earth for a moment. We've gone all the way from a simple beehive to a pretty radical vision of the human future. What does it all mean for us? The ultimate takeaway is this: the same fundamental principles that allow a beehive to act like a single superorganism, things like decentralized control and emergent order, could, once we blend them with technology, become the blueprint for our own society. We might be heading towards a future that is fundamentally and radically self-organizing. And that leaves us with one last, and I think crucial question to think about. In a world that operates less like a machine with a boss at the top and more like a living learning network, what is the role of the individual? What role will you play?